Shoot abuse topic number 1 tonight. Why is it posited by socialists that cultural nationalism is reactionary despite China promoting it? What do you think of them combining cultural nationalism and socialism? This came with a link that you see up on the screen. Oh, I realized something now. Okay, let me go back. So you can see it's a tweet from Zhao Deshuai or something like that, that says, in recent years, there has been a rise in nationalism in China, especially nationalism related to traditional cultures and values. Why is nationalism being promoted? And how does it fit into the narrative of the CPC? Keep reading if you want to find out. So this is a thread. First, understand that nationalism in Chinese context is a little different due to China's modern identity being shaped around a century of humiliation. So nationalism is about the liberation of the Chinese people from foreign and sometimes class oppression. So the CPC really needs to be viewed from the perspective of national communism rather than world communism. To some extent, even Mao was a nationalist of sort. The Zunyi Conference in 1935 were the turning point for adapting a national Chinese-centric revolutionary strategy. The reason why nationalism is heavily promoted by the CPC and affiliated organizations like provincial communist youth leagues is sadly because the idea of proletariat revolution has lost touch with the Chinese society of today. That's interesting. All right. That's interesting. This is a graph, big spender, online shopping holidays. What's it measuring here? It's cropped in a way. So it's measuring Singles Day in China versus Black Friday and Cyber Monday in the US. So this is some holiday, I guess, Singles Day versus Black Friday in America. And they're showing you how China in the darker blue is back in 2012 was about equal with America in terms of big spending, right? I don't know what this number is on the left here. I don't know if that's millions of dollars, I'm assuming. But yeah, so in 2012, they were pretty equal. 2013, China outpaces them for their Singles Day. And every year after that, China is pretty much doubling, if not, pretty much doubling. And recently, 2020, I guess they started to triple spending in China versus the spending in America on Black Friday. The Central Party School, as well as the party itself, is actually seeing a resurgence of proper communist and socialist teachings. Now, that's an interesting thing right there. The Central Party School, as well as the party itself. So that sounds like the political party has their own school, right? So that's like the PLP or the FNM in our hometown having a school, right? That that indoctrinates learners into their party politics. That's very interesting. In the general population, however, traditional values and culture is much more prominent. A very popular stage drama show aired on CCTV last year. It uses an episodic time traveling format, having people from different eras of China interacting with each other. Every episode is centered around a piece of ancient book. Episode 1 was about the Book of Documents. It was told from the Confucian scholar Fu Sheng's perspective. He saved the ancient scroll from the first emperor's book burning. The central theme of the episode was about ancestral veneration, continuation of the Chinese nation from the Yu, the Great Taming, the Great Flood, to today. This type of ancestral, I'll say something. I've never even thought of studying the Chinese, their creation story, like their cosmology. Never really even crossed my mind. This type of ancestral veneration would be very rare on Chinese TV a few years ago. Another example is the officially promoted Yellow Emperor veneration ceremony held in Shaanxi. Every year, the province governor would read out government reports in classical Chinese at the ceremony. A less prominent but important example was a small extract from the official press release by Xinhua news agency, published on the party anniversary on July 1st. Underlying part was a tacit approval of branding the CPC as a continuation of the 3,000-year scholar bureaucrat group. It is framed as a group because to use the word class would be sacrilege. Another example is the heavily promoted Han Fu and traditional culture movement. Bilibili, the Chinese video platform popular among Gen Z, is filled with such content. The state council even got into releasing an advisory to promote traditional culture and enhancing grassroots support for wearing Han Fu while promoting traditional Chinese holidays. The CPC promoting nationalism is going to disappoint many, even accusing it of being revisionist. But one point needs to be emphasized. The aim of socialism and communism has always been the stated goal for the CPC. With a strong ruling party of a superpower that follows communism ideologically, I believe we will eventually realize the goal of communism. Some Marxists would follow everything by the books, but political theories must be adaptive. Marxism succeeded in China because it adapted to the Chinese context, forming Maoism. Working out a system as we enter the post-scarcity era is the opportunity of the millennia for Marxism. But we have to get there first. A strong independent China led by the Communist Party of China will be our champion for that right. That was a little bit lengthy thread. I don't mind those earlier in the show when I have the energies for that. But it's an interesting read, actually. You guys post your thoughts down in the chat, what you thought about it. Untouchable, what were your thoughts as I was reading that thread just now?
Yeah, it reminded me of, I have no problem with cultural nationalism. I think that cultural nationalism creates strong identity. Cultural nationalism is something where once you know what your identity is, collectively, you know who you are as a people. Therefore, no one could come in and make impressions of what that culture should look like because you know what you are. The problem I have is when you attach it to the politics, to the politics of socialism or capitalism. And I can explain that. For instance, one of our big national things that is big in Nassau is Junkanoo.
Yep.
Okay. Now, Junkanoo is something that it represents and resonates with most Bahamians. We see that as a part of our cultural tradition. But when you put capitalism into it, which means that it must turn a pretty penny at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
that pretty penny could be sold to whoever, then the Junkanoo itself is going to be getting directed towards the people who are able to contribute to the most money towards it, which is the tourists. You know what I mean? So it's that Junkanoo. Because if Junkanoo is about the Bahamian people, but we doing it primarily to appeal to the tourist dollar, then the content of that so-called Junkanoo, or what people would consider to be carnival, it would be changed because the content will be focused more directly on them. We want to bring in more tourists to experience this. So when you attach the cultural nationalism to the capitalism, it becomes problematic. When you attach it to socialism, which is another thing, these guys have gone to schools now. You know what I mean? Now it's like training. It's now indoctrination, and
Yep.
it's and what Mao did is he put a little bit of his philosophy in himself, which didn't have nothing to do with the creation of China, you know what I mean, or formulation of all his culture. He gonna put himself into that or his own brand. You're gonna see Chinese culture through a socialistic lens. I don't necessarily know. I don't think that might not necessarily be fair because not everybody into socialism in China. I'm sure. You know what I mean. So I see the good parts of it in forming a national identity because every country should have a national identity. but I find it problematic when you put the politics into it so heavy, because they're going to be needed when you want to galvanize large amounts of people. But I think that when you put the heavily put politics into it, what's going to happen is that it's gonna be changed and have different kind of goals in mind. The content is gonna change with specific goals in mind, veering in the direction of socialism, tourism, capitalism. I think that that's gonna have a heavier impact than the culture itself. And I don't want to sell my culture out to capitalism or for the highest dollar, because it wasn't made for that purpose. So I find that that's the two sides of that thread that I see.
I wanna I wanna double back just so people would know, right? John canoe is a very African expression that we have in the Bahamas, and it within it itself, it's a cultural. Of course, it displays a lot of cultural relevance, but it also has a social component to it as well, social political component, and oftentimes the theme many years when I was growing up home, and I still tap into it actually up here. Um, the theme oftentimes was something African, actually, uh, African or indigenous or something along those lines. And I could remember, and I'm a little bit older than Touchable, it seems, but I could remember there was a time when they started to introduce John Canoe, like how. So in Trinidad they call it play en masse. We call it a rush out, right? So they started introducing the rush out in the hotels. I don't know if Untouchable could remember that. Do you remember that, Untouchable, when they started introducing that in the hotels and white folks kind of rushing out in the hotel, and people were complaining about that?
Yeah, I felt a way about it because I feel like they was giving away the secrets. You know what I mean? There are some things that should remain remain private when you talk about family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't expose family to, you don't expose the outside world to what family does. And I feel a particular way about that. So I just have a different view. And to trigger Happy's comment, the Junkanoo, when it was started, and for the longest period of time, it wasn't about money. You know what I mean? People used to make costumes out of cardboards. It wasn't really a money turning event. You know, it's
No.
become that, but it wasn't originally about that at all. That festival had nothing to do with money. You know what I mean? But that's another matter.
Yeah, and yeah, and you look at Trinidad too. They let some of these folks in, and then man and then went and what's the word again? Trademarked, copyrighted or trademark, whatever it is.
Could you imagine such a thing? Copyright and trademark our original African festival. Where
Yeah,
does that?
the
Where does
steel
that come
pan.
from?
The steel pan. Some Canadians own the steel pan. When Africans in Trinidad created the steel pan. But because they ain't thinking about you have to dot your I's and cross your T's and all this old foolishness. Some two white folks from Canada came in and patented that thing. Patented, that's the word. Patented that thing. Imagine that. So yeah, I definitely feel you on those critiques. Trigger Happy 262 in the chat said, I don't know if that's a good point. Junkanoo is basically the festival equivalent to Chinese festivals. Festivals all have an economic base. Just get the party you control to sponsor it. Okay. Keta says the Chinese never internalize Western values because the Chinese see themselves as a superior race. They consider themselves the kingdom of heaven. Trigger Happy 262 says, like, no matter what, culture is connected to economic systems. This is like someone detaching politics from sports. Everything has politics connected to. Yeah, I think I agree with Trigger Happy there, but I think Untouchable recognizes that too. But in particular, the capitalists, man, when they get their hands on something, look at hip hop. Look at the progression of hip hop, for example, right? The capitalists got their hands on that shit, and look where it is. Keter says communism was practical and good for Chinese because it was a successful revolution that united the country for the first time. The forecast is here, by the way, out of the chat. Keto says, Deng said it doesn't matter what color the cat is as long as it catches mice. The Harsh Valley podcast, D Webb says China is as much socialist as America is capitalist. Both are hybrid systems. I agree with that too. The label at this point is nothing more than symbolic, maybe to continue the rivalry. Well, that's a good point, Webb. Trigger says to make a culture sacred and protected in our modern day and age, you have to have a nationalist party to protect it. That's my point. That's why you can't separate politics. He says, like the reason capitalism contacts Junkanoo because it's not protected. A third party, the nation's party, will simply bar people from participating. Trigger Happy says, okay, you make that point. My rebuttal, how do you stop the capitalists? By just standing there? The Chinese can stop the West because they have a centralized party. They can lock out the West. Bueno, what say you to that comment by Trigger Happy?
No, I think that Trigger Happy makes a point in protecting your culture and having the ability to have the access to power to do that. And I think that what has happened since our leaders are complete sellouts, they can sell our culture out to the highest bidder.
Like
and
nothing.
If we were to have some, like one of our original founders, his name is Lyndon Pinland, certain things he was more inclined to protect. He was more protective of. So I would agree when he says that you have to have the political power and the will to protect certain things. And I agree with that, in fact. I actually agree with that. And I think that the guys that we have either have been unwilling or because the money is so good, they can't say no. They can't say no.
Yeah. Keller said, well, the U.S. had a capitalist revolution, China a communist one. All economies are planned. The difference is who's doing the planning. In the U.S., it's Wall Street, and in China, it's the CCP. That's another good point, too, actually. Antos, do you have any last words for this prompt?
No, I know Trigger Happy gave this prompt because he's have these essay questions, but it was a good dialogue. It's something that should be considered in the future moving forward.
Yeah, that prompt there reminds me of the GCE exam. The GCE had that kind of shit to it too. Yeah, so that was a good discussion there. I wish there were more folks to get a variety, but I know we have only on the
they're gonna be here. I know they're gonna be here. They're gonna be here.
Yeah, Tanzan traveling. Yeah, Tanzan traveling and whatnot. I know Kevin Carre is pretty busy lately too, so we might even see him for a minute. Let me catch these last.
And Zuli's at 12 o'clock. So he
out there on the host role right now, so he'll be around later on. D Webb says, "Yep, lobbyists create the laws here, whereas it's a small group of elitists that control the government in CCP. Person who gain more priority in the U.S. while Chinese dominance for the CCP." He was talking to Keta about that. Keta says yes. Trigger Happy gets the last word on this prompt. He says that's also what I've been pushing in past shows. If we even want to revive our spirituality, we need strong, centralized power. Just put money into African spirituality. Yeah, that's that conversation was actually a good conversation. We should have more like that. Yeah, and by the way, you can tell a Trigger Happy prompt.
Yeah, you got to start it with 5 paragraphs at least. 5 paragraphs.
Let's go to Shoot the Breeze. Topic number 2. If you guys are enjoying the conversation, just drop a 1 for me if you don't mind.